discuss some takeaways from the chat. So as Preen said, can we ask if you're not available for the breakout room, that's absolutely fine. But if you could just send a chat to Matthew or Preen, they'll be arranging the rooms in the background. And we just want to make sure everyone has a really nice experience in their room. So we'll bring everyone back to see if there's any last questions. We promise we'll have you back at your desk that you're probably already at by 11 o'clock at the latest. So this event is extra special because it's our first collaboration event with our sister project, iCommunity. So I'm going to quickly pass you over to my colleague, Susie Khan, who's going to give you a brief intro into the project. So Susie?
Thanks very much, Sharon, and hello, everybody. Yes, iCommunity is a joint project of the Wheel and its equivalent in Northern Ireland, NICFA. And so what this project has been about is the fact that on this island, we have always, in the community and voluntary and social enterprise sector, been learning from each other. We have had many ways that we've exchanged knowledge, many ways that we have collaborated. But 2 years ago, the boards and senior management of both the Wheel and NICFA felt that we could enhance that ability to share the kinds of learnings that we all have in the different jurisdictions, in the different ways that we are all working, because really in a post mentioning the B word context, that after Brexit, a lot of the EU funding that facilitated such learning had shifted. And so we felt it would be very helpful to just let each other's membership know about each other again. And we signpost through iCommunity examples of collaborative practice, case studies. We have a lovely newsletter that also signposts the kind of funds that are still available to enable shared learning, shared working, and collaboration on the island against particular themes that make sense as an island: climate change, biodiversity, the Sustainable Development Goals, inequality, social enterprise development, and rural inclusion and digital inclusion transformation. So these are all things we're all working on. And so that's what iCommunity is about. So if you're interested in learning more, we'll share how to be signed up to our newsletter, and you can reach out to me directly. And we'll put the website and all of that into the chat for you. And I'll be very happy to field any queries people have. You're muted there, Sharon.
Good, thanks for that. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Susie. I appreciate the call to be muted. I'm glad it was me. Yeah, so this is our way of connecting. So the whole point of the collab is the event has actually been advertised north and south, and we have participants from both. So we've mixed everybody up into the room. So hopefully you'll get to meet some new people in your breakout rooms later and learn about some of the work that other people are doing. So that is the point of this morning. So I suppose to get into the breakfast club, because you're not here to listen to me or Susie. So when we're thinking about what our themes are going to be, we get the inspiration from really strange places. So I saw a post on LinkedIn. It was about provision of frontline services. And it said, there comes a point where we need to just stop pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And it's Desmond Tutu when I actually went looking into it. So I suppose in our sector, it can be very easy to keep doing what we've always done, and especially in times of great need, which with the cost of living crisis and other such issues, the work that's done can provide immediate relief to those that we help. But what happens when you take a step back and look at the wider picture? So is the work we're doing enough? Is it having a long-term impact? And how do you even start examining that? So we're going to have that discussion this morning. So we're joined by two speakers, one from the Republic and one from Northern Ireland. And what's really interesting is both of our speakers are independently aiming for the same goal. And they both envisage a society without food banks, and they're both on massive journeys of change, and they have huge learning to share, and we're delighted that they're happy to do so. So Yvonne Fleming is a senior manager in Crosscare, the social support agency of the Catholic Archdiocese of Dublin. She has over 30 years experience in the non-for-profit sector, of which 20 years is in management roles, and she has worked in the areas of homelessness, migrant issues, youth and community work, amongst other areas. And Jonny Currie is Northern Ireland's lead for the Trussell Trust, which is an anti-poverty charity that supports a nationwide network of food banks to provide emergency food and support to people locked in poverty. And they campaign for change to end the need for food banks in the UK. So, thank you both for coming. I'm going to start with Yvonne. So, Yvonne, your work in the area, it came to our attention when you wrote a blog about your work on changing the need for food banks in Ireland for the Wheels website. So could you introduce us a bit to yourself and Crosscare, its work in the area of food banks and how you came to be involved, please?
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks for inviting me. So as Sharon said, Crosscare is the social services of the Catholic Archdiocese of Dublin. So we work in Dublin City and the greater Dublin area. We're around since the 1940s. So as you can imagine, the organisation has changed over the years. The current organisation has about 500 staff, about 25 million a year to run, a huge section on residential homeless services, a huge offering on youth services, and then a number of smaller projects, including projects on addiction, refugee migration, and food poverty. So I've been in the organisation in different roles for 20 years. And in 2020, we had some changes I'm on a senior management team that answers directly to the CEO. In 2020, we had some changes in our team, and I took over the food section, which up to then I hadn't been overseeing. So as with when you take over any new piece of work, you go and visit it, you talk to the team, you get to know the team, started looking at what were academics writing about food poverty, what research was being done, was there anything in Ireland, was there anything internationally, and really became very uncomfortable with our offering. So our offering was food banks around the city and county. And, really felt that didn't align with our values, our strategic plan. So our values are love, respect, and excellence. Our strategic plan talks about great outcomes for people in bad situations. And it just felt to me like in an Ireland of 2020, a mature welfare system, we shouldn't be celebrating and seeing food banks as a good thing. So that kind of commenced a journey of change that has brought us up to today. Do you want me to say a bit more on that now, Sharon, or will I? You're on mute, Sharon.
You're on mute, Sharon.
No, sorry, thanks. I'll introduce Jonny. I'll just leave myself off mute now and we'll save us all a lot of drama for the rest of the morning. I'll introduce Jonny because we'll come back. There's definitely a few bits in there to unpick if that's okay. Thanks, Yvonne. So Jonny, Trussell Trust is a charity that works with a social franchise model that has committed to ending the need for food banks across the UK and Northern Ireland. Can you tell us a bit about Trussell Trust? And I've asked if you could please elaborate on social franchise, how and when you got involved and where ye are at the moment in your goal.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. It's great to be with you all this morning. Thank you. The Trussell Trust is a UK-wide charity supporting a network of food banks on a social franchise model. So what that means, and it's not that prevalent within the charity sector, it's kind of along the lines of a franchise model that you'd see with private businesses. But for us, it's around how we can ensure that food banks have a shared way of working, and more importantly, also that they buy into our strategic goal for ending the need for food banks. So it's really around one small part of the charity that we work with them on. All of our food banks are independent of us in terms of all of them are charities. They're charities in their own right, but there are certain ways of working around how we think a food bank should operate, which food banks largely welcome, that the social franchise offering sort of packages up every couple of years. So we have a franchise agreement that's updated every 2 years that every food bank in our network has to sign up to if they want to stay part of the network. So that means they've got access to our policies and procedures, to our website, to all the support that the Trussell Trust offers. It's about 150, well, it's actually currently free, but it's £150 a year for new food banks who want to join the network. So we're the smallest part of the Trussell Trust. because we're a UK-wide organisation here in Northern Ireland. We've got social franchise agreements with about 440 charities across the UK. We have 22 food banks in the network here, which is 5% of the total number, and we work in 50 locations across Northern Ireland.
That's fantastic. And in terms of eradicating the need for food banks, like, where do you feel you are? Like, that's a big goal. Where do you feel you are at that?
Well,
where are you in the stage?
Yeah, so we are 3 years into a 5-year strategy, which we launched in the middle of the pandemic, which wasn't great, around ending the need for food banks. And where we're at is food bank need is higher than it has ever been, Sharon. So, like, especially in Northern Ireland, we're the region of the UK where food bank use is increasing at a much higher rate. So while we're very much committed to ending the need for food banks, we sit within the tension of food bank use is increasing at a higher than ever rate, and it doesn't look like we're going away anytime soon. So there's plenty of tension for us to unpack there. So we are further along in the journey, believe it or not, but food bank use still isn't going away anytime soon, sadly.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to touch on that. I think it came up before. Yvonne, you mentioned something interesting that for me. So you said you kind of looked at what you had and it just didn't feel right to you. And I'm sure looking back, it seems very logical. But I suppose there was a point where you were probably the only voice in the room. You were possibly the only person looking at this going, hold on, is this making... is this not as much sense as so I suppose for anyone in the room, because people are going to have different, we're talking about food banks today, but people are going to have different services. Have you, like, how did you move that along? How did you look at something and think, I'm not sure this is as much sense as people think it is, and like, what are the next steps to that?
Okay, so when you take over any new piece of work, you go and you meet the teams and you visit the projects and you see people queuing up and getting food parcels. And I had staff saying to me, oh, see that lady there? She's coming for 5 years, or she's coming for 4 years. And, I was thinking about that. And what I do is try to put myself into that situation, because I think we're all pretty close to, well, I'll speak for myself, if something could happen in my life that wouldn't, I lose my job, somebody has an accident, and you could be very close to a need for social services. And you think, what would I want now? Would I want to have to stand in that queue and somebody hand me a parcel of food that I had no decisions about its contents? Nobody asked me, what's going on that you need this food? And my neighbors can see me in the queue. And so I just felt, I put myself in that and think, no, that's making me feel very uncomfortable. I wouldn't come to this service. So for me, it was, I'm a great fan of looking at what everyone else is doing, and if it's good, copying it. I don't think we have to have big, new, original ideas. So looking at countries that were further on in their thinking, Canada, other countries in Europe, seeing what everyone else was doing there, seeing what academics were coming up, what research was coming up. And everything was pointing to, food banks as a sticking plaster, not looking at the drivers into food poverty, not helping people out of food poverty, just kind of giving them a sticking plaster. And so then when you look at the academics, you look at what other countries are doing, you look at how what we were doing did not align with our values and strategies, and take all of that, listen to the staff and what they were saying. So some staff thought what we were doing was okay, food banks, and some felt kind of demoralized, like, my job isn't very complex, I just hand out parcels of food. And so it felt like we weren't really giving people a meaningful job. So and they themselves didn't feel it was a great service that they were offering. So then what you go from that to then trying to package it into, if this is where we are, if this is what the research and the academics are saying, if there's other countries moving away from food banks and not celebrating them, because I had a sense that food banks, and the longer the queue and the more people using them, oh, we're doing so much great work. And this just exploded during COVID. And, one of my questions during COVID was, people are at home and they still have the same social protection payments they had before. I just think in our sector, we all wanted to do something during COVID, and everyone got into this food parcel thing. So there's food parcels flying all over the place in Dublin, and I just was uncomfortable with it and didn't want to oversee, you know, if this was now an area of my oversight, I wasn't comfortable with it. So I had to package what I wanted it to look like, and then I had to say, this is where we are now, this is where we want to be. How are we going to get from A to B, before I could then go and talk to my colleagues in the senior management team, CEO, board, funders, all of that. But I had to get it in a kind of simple, understandable, meaningful way first. So I had to distill down concepts into a series of practical steps that I could take.
Yeah, I know when I met you the first time and you said it to me like that, I was a bit like, oh my gosh. It was one of those kind of, like, you do doubt to think the more people using it, the more successful it is. But when you reverse engineer that out, and you gave me a wonderful example of the woman in the supermarket. If you want to tell, you said that if it was you,
If it was me, I would want somebody to meet me in a discreet location, to give me food, to say, what is going on that has got you to a point where you need this food? I say, you know, my husband has an accident, I lost my job, I'm covering all the main bills, but when it comes to food, I've nothing left. They say, okay, let's have a look at what you might be entitled to. And show me how you navigate the social protection system. Show me how you fill in forms. Give me the comfort of, while we're figuring all this out, there is food for you to collect from here every week. But it's discreet. I come with my own shopping bags. And the aim is getting people back to the supermarket with their own money, choosing their own food in the shortest period of time. And, you know, the way, you know, I used to win over funders, our board, our senior management team, our CEO, was to say, is that not what you would want for yourself? So think about this, put yourself, do you want to be standing in that queue or for 5 years? Or do you want somebody to say, the food is here, relax. The food is here for you week on week. If it takes us 4 weeks to figure things out, if it takes us 12 months to figure things out, that's fine. We don't put a time limit. But what we have now is 7 locations around Dublin City and County, where we have what we call collection and casework bases. And you come, you collect your food, and you meet with a caseworker.
Okay, that's brilliant. But it was that kind of illustrative picture that you gave of, like, do you want somebody collecting a parcel, or do you want them in the supermarket choosing what it is that they want to eat? That really struck me. And Jonny, you came in at a different stage in the Trussell Trust, because they had already set their strategic direction. So that must have been interesting for you to start working in a food bank, to be told that they're on a mission to eradicate the need for food banks. So, like, that's a major strategic redirection. So can you talk to that, and how it how that's working for you and for the Trussell Trust, and how members are finding that, etc.?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for 2 seconds. Jonny, there's just been a couple of comments that you're kind of hard to hear.
Yeah.
I wonder, can you... Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Kira.
Hopefully that's better now, and I'm a wee bit clearer for people. I've got the microphone turned up full.
Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Thanks.
Okay. So I joined the organisation once the strategic direction had been set, but it really was the strategic direction that attracted me to work for the organisation. I had worked in youth and community work in Belfast for about 12 years before then, and I was probably quite critical of the Trussell Trust and its approach prior to this new strategy, which was very much around, let's just get a food bank in every town that needs one, which I understood, but really it isn't sustainable. So while the strategy was in place UK wide, I think it's probably fair to say that they had underthought or hadn't really reached the point of exploring what it looks like for Northern Ireland, which was why I was in post to really think about that. So it was a challenge when you talk about ending the need for food banks and launching your thinking about that in the middle of a pandemic when, you know, food is just flying off the shelves and it's needed more and more than it ever is. But for us, it was really around what that looks like for the unique context of Northern Ireland, where most of our food banks are run by churches or sit under the governance of a faith-based organisation. And we know that churches and faith-based organisations, when it comes to change, it can take a long time, let's be honest. And also food banks have a very high profile, both in the local communities, also outside in the local media. And they're actually bucking the trend in terms of volunteering. Some of our food banks actually have waiting lists of people that want to volunteer, whereas volunteering has actually gone down across Northern Ireland broadly. So there's a lot of contradictions there that we were going right into. I suppose one of the main things was food banks were worried that we were looking to shut them down, and all the good things that they do and all that sense of meaning and sense of purpose that we were wanting to just do away with. So there were probably some things we could have done better around communication, and we could have started from a place of which we're doing now around everything that's good about what you do. It could be something else if the need for food banks wasn't there. Food banks are an amazing community-led response to need, but it's very deficit-based. If it was asset-based and transformed into something else, my goodness, what an infrastructure we've put in place that we could now have long-term if the food bit wasn't the bit that was needed.
Yeah, and I mean, you take credit for the title. So we actually had From Charity to Justice was one of the subtitles, and that was from you. And I'd love to hear you just elaborate on that for everyone else, because I found it very impactful.
Well, so the charitable bit of what we do, it feels good. You know, it feels good to give food to people. It feels good to feel like you're kind of part of something and you're connected. But food banks in their current operating model, no matter how hard we try, it's incredibly transactional. It's incredibly patriarchal. So we're the people with the power. We're giving you the food, and that's not, you know, our well-being as people that run a food bank should be tied up in the well-being of the people that need the food. So we need to equalise that, and that's a journey that all of our food banks are on. All of our food banks are bought into our strategy. They're all at different stages in terms of how achievable they think that is, because they're also incredibly busy and they're all volunteer-led. But so one of the main things that we've emphasised is that you're incredibly close to people who have real need that you can learn from, and that proximity is probably the greatest gift that you've been given. So what can you learn from that proximity? How can you build solidarity with people? How can we change minds? How can we change policy? How can we change our communities so that that transactional model really is put to bed, and we have a strong network of services in place that reduces the likelihood of someone having to actually access a food bank?
Yeah, still amazing. And actually, so you both ended up at the same, you're probably later into it, Jonny. And also, can I say, I love that you talked about how Trussell Trust, you may not have been the biggest fan, but actually when they redirected, they attracted somebody into the organization that actually was happy to align with their values, which I think, you know, values is something you have both spoken about a lot as well. So you've had your whole, right, we know this isn't working the way it is. And I think when you talk about communicating with members, Jonny, you conducted like this huge piece of research to get metrics. You talk about that proximity to your users and finding out. So could you talk a little bit more? Yvonne, I'm going to ask you the same question about, right, you've convinced the important, your board, your CEO, like there's more to do, there's more stakeholders involved. So Jonny, could you speak to the metrics you collected first?
Yeah, so we collect a lot of data from our food banks in terms of why people are coming, what are the main needs, what are the causes, what's the onwards referral journey so that people are less likely to have to come back. I suppose what the metrics really were telling us is there were probably three main things that we needed to consider on an ongoing basis to try and reduce the need for our services. The first one was a strong network of referral pathways, which is very hard in the midst of a real kind of crisis in public service funding in Northern Ireland. But what are the other steps that have to be put in place so that someone doesn't have to darken the door of a food bank, or at best doesn't have to come back? 60% of people referred to our food banks haven't accessed any other service before. So what's the referral journey that we can put in place for people in terms of connecting them to other services, so that the food bank is just really just one piece of the jigsaw? Second one is around financial inclusion. So really, like, it's not about a lack of food, it's about a lack of income. That's what's driving food bank use. So what are the policy drivers that will put more money into people's pockets and will catch people where they are in a food bank? If that's the only place that they're going to, how can we match them up with some advice, support, so they can maximize their income? And the third one, really, that so that the metrics were telling us in terms of the range of people coming to the food banks, is we need to ensure that the voices of lived experience are at the centre of what we do, and they're driving what needs to change. And that's probably been the hardest journey, I think, for Trussell Trust and for our food banks, in terms of how can we, when we're sort of wedded to a very transactional model, how can we ensure that the people that we're speaking to on a daily basis are the ones that are whose voices we're amplifying, so that they're the people that are changing minds, that are building empathy, and are really drivers of change.
I love it. I've just shared your latest blog, because your stats are fantastic. Even the way they're presented, I really enjoy looking at them, and the pictures. It's a really good way of communicating. And Yvonne, same question. So you got your board involved, and you've gone national. Like, you weren't happy enough stopping there. So do you want to maybe bring us a bit on your journey of what you did then?
Well, so we just, as I was saying earlier, to kind of distill down what we wanted it to look like. So we wanted to develop this, what we call food poverty casework model, which we're just in the process of completing, actually writing up the model. And it is what I described. It is food accompanied by casework. And the casework is bespoke to the person's situation. So a person might need help with meal planning, budgeting, access to social protection payments, etc. And in that model, we might draw in other service providers. We might draw in other service providers from our own, other services from our own organisation. And then the plan is, but we're not there yet, is that we then have a whole kind of social policy side to it, where we see the biggest trends, the things that are driving people into food poverty, and we lobby and change at a macro level. I mean, the dream is eventually all the macro issues, so the public policies and programs that are not working for people and driving them into food poverty, are changed, and nobody's coming to us. This is the aim. So I mean, we're articulating it slightly differently, but the aim is that people don't need us in the future. But for now, what we're finding is often in a relatively short period of weeks, we can get people to a point where their income has slightly increased, whether we help them restructure a loan, help them restructure debt, got them a social welfare payment they didn't know they were entitled to, etc., etc. And it comes to a point where the caseworker and the person using the service agree that they can, I think, another week now, and then we'll be all right. We can cut off the food. And that's agreed with the person using the service. And they're reminded that they can come back in the future if there's some kind of crisis or they need help. But oftentimes it turns from them coming initially for food, but the greatest value is the other piece that they get. But they not only get that casework, they get new knowledge, how to, restructure, how to make a phone call to an energy provider.
Yeah,
how to have the confidence to make a phone call to an energy provider and say, I want to change my package here. Things like that. So it's quite a broad range of things that is done in that casework session, and various other areas of expertise drawn in as well.
Yeah, but you're lobbying to actually moved this model out as well. So you've got into the political arena, you've moved it beyond Crosscare. Could you speak a bit to how
Yeah.
you did that?
So it was kind of opportune that in the middle of all this stuff in 2020 and me kind of taking over the food poverty piece, that at the same time the Minister of State in the Department of Social Protection in the Republic of Ireland happened to be somebody that I knew because he worked in Crosscare. And so his brief included food poverty. That was a good opportunity. So we were able to link on food poverty and lobbied him to get some money into the national budget to look at piloting this casework model. And so it was a great celebration when we saw the budget, that there was an amount of money in that. And then through a tendering process, organizations, including us, pitched for that money. So there's now an organization in Cork, an organization in Limerick, and us formally piloting over 8 months this casework and collection model, which the aim is that at the end of 18 months, it'll be evaluated, it'll be a success, and hopefully there'll be some solid bit of money within the Department of Social Protection's grant giving capacity that organizations can get to run this kind of work. So basically we're trying to get organizations who, and Jonny puts it very well, like what people are doing in food banks and people's motivations are absolutely sound and good. They could be doing something a little bit more and better. And I think, certainly our staff wanted to do more and better. Now, in the process of change from food banks to this food poverty casework and collection model, we did have some redundancies. We did have people who left and changed job along the way. So, it is not without, that process was not without its problems.
That actually leads into probably my next question, because in a lot of cases, and especially, we talk about post-COVID and burnout and just exhaustion for the sector. Like in so many, we all know sometimes it's just easier to keep doing the things that you've always done. And I think that's why I find this conversation could be replicated across any of our subsectors, but I think it's particularly interesting for food poverty, given that it's so prevalent at the moment. So why do you think it's so important to reevaluate the work that we do and to actually say, I know this is core, there's jobs relying on this, or Jonny, in your case, there might be organizations that this is their sole core function. Can you, I suppose, give your thoughts on why is it so important to make those hard decisions in order to make the change? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I suppose what I always think about is that food banks, certainly in the north here, are a relatively recent phenomenon. While there's always been huge areas of socioeconomic need in Northern Ireland. Our first food bank in our network opened in 2010. So we have a crisis support network that has sprung up in an incredibly short space of time. I think if it's come up in a short space of time, that gives us enough of a window to think about how we can still remember a pre-food bank era, which wasn't perfect, and the long tail of poverty in Northern Ireland predates the crises that we're in now. But if we can remember what it was like before, we can get back to there and use that to reimagine what the future state will be. So for us, it's around, we don't want to become almost normalized as a potential extension of the welfare state, even too, in terms of our referral pathways, where it's almost hard to imagine food banks not existing in Northern Ireland. How can we break that cycle? And for us, it's around just realizing that this has been a very short-term thing. It's also not sustainable. So our food banks aren't funded by kind of government really at all. It's purely donations from the public, which is a huge ask and local communities are incredibly generous. But really for us, it's saying, especially the decision makers, especially in the absence of Stormont, local communities have done all the heavy lifting here and they've done enough. And now it's over to you. Give us some solutions. We know what they are, but you need to action them.
Yeah, you had a really interesting thing about how the different sides of the political spectrum responded to you. If you'd like to share that.
Yeah, and this is just my analysis.
Yes, of course, yeah.
But I guess there's an ideological purity to food banks that, certainly maybe on the left broadly it's around, oh, it's a disgrace that you exist, it's awful, you should disappear, you need to vanish, which I understand. But food banks are a very positive community-led response to need, and there are good things in that show up in all sorts of areas when they're needed, like during the pandemic. So there's something good there, that while you don't want it to have to exist, thank goodness people step up. And on the, kind of largely on the right, and this reflects conversations that we do have across the political spectrum, is, folks on that side say, oh, you're doing a great job, how can we support you? You're a really good example of communities stepping up and lifting themselves up by their bootstraps and just responding. So well done, you. And they're totally missing the justice imperative of, this is because, poverty is a political choice. And that's why we've had to step up, and there's more that you need to do. So we sit in the middle of those, where we're almost trying to change minds on both sides, Sharon. And that sort of fluctuates depending on the different spaces that you're in.
Yeah, it's just so interesting to hear how everybody has an opinion, but they're so different. And Yvonne, for you, like, hard decisions about redundancies, about doing away with programs, for you, why is it so important to reconsider and reevaluate what it is that you're doing?
Well, there's I mean, for me, it was just, I couldn't oversee the work as it was when I took it over. It was a clear mismatch between values and strategic aims and what we were doing. But also the thinking in terms of food banks, you just do a Google search, is changing. And Jonny outlined some of it there. But like there's kind of academics behind it now. Like, you just have to Google a bit about Canada, and so there's a lot written now about the need to end. If you put the need to end food banks into Google, you'll get lots of stuff in The Guardian and all that kind of thing. So there's, people are moving on from that. We are not by any means saying the people who set up food banks in their community are doing a bad thing. And I said that in the blog, they're very well motivated. They're very generous with their time. But for us, we're still giving out free food. But we're doing it for a shorter period of time with a bespoke casework piece, and then a lobbying bit where we're hoping, like Jonny is, that the work we're doing will become less and less and less, because people will need it less, because they'll be able to access social protection easier. They won't be having to, the processes to access it won't be as complex. There's a real issue with digital divide. There's a real issue with people whose first language isn't English, finding it too hard to get what they're entitled to, etc., etc. So I don't know if that answers the question, Sharon.
Yeah, I think what I loved about speaking to both of you before we prepped for this was the fact that you are essentially both committed to doing yourself out of a job. And I think that can be the hardest decision, or the hardest to make a principled decision that has, it's very easy to make principled decisions that doesn't have direct impacts on people and funding and organizations. So to me, people who are committed to doing the right thing with consequences, to me, was just very leaderly, which is why I wanted to have you both to hear this morning. We're going to finish up to let people into the breakout rooms, but the one question we ask all of our speakers is, what has been your best or favorite piece of leadership advice that you've received over the course of your career that you would be happy to share?
There's also a question in there. Sorry, Sharon.
Yeah, no, there are questions coming in as well. But if we just finish up this bit, and then I'll bring
so leadership advice, not really a piece of advice, but one of the things that we do in Crosscare is I'm not sure about the language, but the concepts are very good. So there's a guy called Robert Greenleaf, and he writes a lot about servant leadership. and you can Google him, Robert Greenleaf, servant leadership. So we took his concepts of servant leadership and made them into a course that everyone who joins Crosscare has to do. And to break it down, to be really simple about it, servant leadership is all about being a servant first rather than a leader first. So in a kind of traditional form of leadership, it's all about coming in and being the boss and having all the answers and telling people what to do. But when you're a servant leader, you come in, you listen, you help the people that you line manage to be the best that they can be. So for me, that inspires and informs my form of leadership. So even in this work, it was about listening to the team and saying, you're like, they weren't proud of their work. They were demoralized. They weren't showing me the work that they were doing with great pride. And that's what I want for people. So when I come to work, it's, if I'm line managing Sharon, I want to see what is Sharon hoping for here? How can I help her remove barriers? You know, Sharon comes to work with great energy. She wants to do something really out there and exciting and take some risks. How can I help Sharon do that? So for me, the whole approach of the servant leadership model that we took from Greenleaf and adapted for our own organization has been a wonderful way of developing it as a leader for me.
Okay, we might Google that and put it into the chat. Thanks, thanks, Yvonne. And Jonny, what would be yours?
Some insight that's been really helpful to me was by Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan priest speaker. And it's that practical truth is more likely to be found at the bottom and the edges than at the top or the center of most groups, institutions, and cultures. And that's been really important for me, going from an organization prior to Trussell that had 12 people to go into one that works for 300. And as the farthest outpost of kind of Trussell and the smallest part of the network, we've been able to, I think, be a reminder to the bigger organization around what are some of the those really important issues at the bottom and at the margins as a part of the network that kind of borders another country that isn't in the UK and it's in the EU, on all of our complexities in Northern Ireland. And it's also helpful for us as the biggest provider of emergency food in Northern Ireland, but not the only ones. So, you know, it's really important for me to be in regular contact with independent food banks, with really small providers of crisis support that would never join our network and may at times be very critical of us. For me, that connection into those groups on the margins and at the bottom are really important to keep us grounded and focused on what's important.
That's, yeah, that's come true in every conversation I have had with you. We have a couple of questions. However, to stick to time, we have time for questions at the end. So myself and the team will pull them together at the Q&A box in the comment section while we put people into breakout rooms, if that's okay. But I just want to thank you both so much for being, like, you both are so knowledgeable and so clear, and it just comes out of you both, so what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it, and it's just so interesting. You were both doing it in different ways, but aiming for the same, from charity to justice. So thank you both so much for your time. I hope you stick around, and we'll pop you into breakout rooms now as well. So for anyone who hasn't done this before, we're going to pop people into breakout rooms where there will be a facilitator to let people introduce each other, and we have some questions based on what you heard today, and we'll be collecting questions from the room, and we'll throw some to the speakers when they come back afterwards, if that's okay. If that's okay, we can move everybody now. I hope you got some good stuff from your breakout room. We had a great one. We talked actually about kind of our own understanding of North and South, which was part of the point of the collab today, and what some of our colleagues are, some of the challenges that Jonny referenced, and we also talked about values and the importance of values and how that had come up. We did actually get a couple of questions in, so Jonny and Yvonne, if you have a moment. Yvonne, somebody asked, are volunteers still involved in the food provision and casework because of the nature of the role now?
Not in the casework. It's a professional role. So less volunteer involvement in this model.
Yeah, that's fair. It sounds, there's another comment about how it sounds like it's resource intensive, the new model that people are bringing in. So how do you balance that?
Resource intensive as in?
It's much easier for somebody to just hand somebody a food parcel as opposed to, so
the challenge is that you have to find money to employ caseworkers. So as well as, you know, the food and the logistics and the location, so hence we're reliant on a lot of annual philanthropic grants, while we're funding it through short-term grants, Bank of Ireland, Community Foundation of Ireland, this and that, funding it to those and getting the department to come, look at this, look, it's working, it's getting people out of food poverty quicker. Hence, the department set up the pilot that I talked about. But that's only funding one of the caseworkers. So it's challenging. It's expensive because the caseworker roles can't be voluntary.
Yeah. No, that's I think that's probably just one of the realities of what you're doing, really, isn't it? That there's no nice way of getting out of that. Jonny's after putting his report, I would the newest one in the Trussell Trust, it's just there in the chat, and highly recommend a read. One of the questions that came in was in relation to people who were perhaps additionally vulnerable, like perhaps with serious mental health issues, who might have more trouble accessing resources, or people with addiction. So how do either of you see the are you linking with local services? Or do you intend on bringing it in, or does that make sense?
Yeah, we link a lot with the services in this. So say we have a collection casework point in West Dublin, we will make sure we are familiar with all the other service providers in the area, and they're familiar with us. So the casework, we might be providing the food, and we might agree with an addiction service, okay, we'll do a bit of work with this person on budgeting or meal planning, and the other organization might be doing a separate niche piece of work on addiction. So it is whatever way that person can get everything they need. We can do the food and certain other bits, but we will, you know, say it's a really complex immigration piece. We have a migrant project within Crosscare, so they're technically doing the casework and we're just giving the food. So it won't always be our food poverty caseworker doing all the casework if it's very niche expert piece.
Yeah. And Jonny, how does that work for you guys up north?
Yeah, so for us, there's really no typical food bank user anymore. We've had 10,000 brand new people use a food bank for the first time this year in the first 6 months. Roughly 1 in 4 people referred to our food banks have someone in the household who's working. So you've got that side of things, but we also have more and more people presenting at our food banks or being referred to our food banks who have really complex needs, who have fallen through the cracks in other gaps in public services. And food banks are seen as the only other thing that they can refer someone to by agencies. It puts food banks in a really difficult position. We're not equipped to handle someone that presents with complex needs, who may be aggressive, who may be a danger to themselves primarily, but also to others. You know, we're only really meant to be one part of the jigsaw in a wider network of crisis support. Plus, I mean, all of our food banks are volunteer led as well. So huge challenges when you're presented with those. sorts of cases. So we are seeing it more and more now. So we're working very, very closely with mental health charities like Inspire, who work north and south, and with other referral agencies to make sure there's an onward journey that we can refer them on to, but also being really, really blunt with referral partners around, why are you sending them to us? We're a food bank. So, it's really your responsibility. That sounds harsh, but for us, it's around being very honest about what we can and can't do. And that's as much for the protection of the person that's being referred.
That's so interesting, because the assumption is that the food bank should be liaising with everyone else. But when you think about food bank provision, it's probably you're in a very, very poor place if that's where you've gotten to. So actually, maybe it's the people referring down to you as well, and that those partnerships go in as well as out. So I'm just going to call, thank you both so much. I'm just going to, Susie just wants to have a word with people before they leave, if that's okay.
Thanks, Sharon. Well, it was really just to thank everyone for coming as this first collaboration between the Leadership Breakfast and the Leadership Academy and iCommunity. And certainly in our group, that mixture of hearing about different practices in different jurisdictions, there was some learning jumping out for people hearing about something called a social supermarket that isn't a model in the Republic, but is in Northern Ireland. So those kind of exchanges are wonderful. And so I'm just really encouraging people, if they find that kind of exchange in the jurisdictions in their area of interest and they want to be in touch. And, sometimes it's just people saying, do you know, is there something in the Republic that's like this? Do you know, is there something in Northern Ireland that's like this? That's what we're here for. And that's what we're amplifying through the various case studies and events like this that will be ongoing, just bringing people together where they can get to meet each other. Or you'll find out about that through the wheel, through the Academy, Leadership Academy, through NICVA's publications. All of the different events is how you'll in your usual channels, you'll find out about future iCommunity events. But you'll also look at those examples on our website, and you can sign up for the iCommunity newsletter, which is only a quarterly newsletter. It doesn't bombard you in your inbox. It's a nice coming together of good news stories, collaboration, opinion pieces, and funding alerts, the all important funding alerts to allow people to do these collaborations. So that's all from me. And thanks for everybody's interaction. I learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susie. We actually had met in our room. One of the participants actually had just partnered up with or had just made contact with their Northern counterpart, and they were saying it was illuminating to be able to see different practices, different areas of sharing or whatever. So we would encourage anybody to get involved. So the iCommunity Hub email list is in the chat, as is the Leadership Academy LinkedIn group, which was a LinkedIn page, which is the best place to follow us. Our next event is coming to Cork, where we will be discussing leadership and legacies. So if you'd like to join us, we'll be in Nanonagle. It's actually quite interesting because it kind of leads on from this conversation of, when you're dedicated to the social change and then you're not there anymore, how does it live on beyond you? So I would just like to thank both of our participants, Yvonne and Jonny. I know in our room, they just really loved the conversation. So if either of you have anything that you would like to get us to do before you leave, do please feel free to get a short plug in.
Okay, I'll just give out a phone number for anyone who is in food poverty in the Dublin city or county. So anyone who needs our service, the number is 01-891-3022. And then anyone can link with me directly. I never go on my LinkedIn, so don't use my LinkedIn.
I know.
So Yvonne Fleming at crosscare.ie, if they want to copy anything of what we're doing, I'm a big fan of copying things, good ideas. So I can share stuff on that. Just give me a shout directly. But the phone number is for people, and that phone number will get somebody through to a caseworker.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And share that.
I think you might regret that call to action slightly. There's loads of questions coming through on the food bank here as well. So, Jonny, are you going to learn from Yvonne's mistake, or?
I've just got one quick thing. I just posted a link in the chat there to. It's a link to a petition for our Guarantee Our Essentials campaign, which is our sort of flagship policy ask of Westminster around and raising the basic level of universal credit to a level that actually reflects reality. For folks in the north especially, it'd be great if you could sign that petition. And also if you're in the south as well, because it would really blow our organisation's mind to see people coming in from the south, because sometimes they barely understand here. So if they get some responses from the south, I'd really appreciate that as well, just to sort of build some extra momentum behind that campaign.
Yeah, well, I've just done it. It literally took me 2 seconds. So please do it. And thank you so much. It's 11:01. I'm 1 minute late. My apologies. Thanks so much to the speakers. We will email you with all the details that we discussed this morning, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Appreciate it.